The drizzle had been falling all night, a fine mist that coated the streets and blurred the glow of street lamps into pale halos. Rios and I sat in the cab of the ambulance, waiting for dispatch to break the monotony, the heater humming against the damp chill. It was nearing 2 a.m. By that dead stretch of the shift where you start to believe nothing will happen until the radio finally cracked to life. Medic 2-3, respond to 45 Westbrook Apartments, Unit 6B, unresponsive male, CPR, in progress, by bystander. Rios met my eyes. Here we go. We pulled into the complex within minutes, tires hissing over the wet asphalt. The building was an aging 3-story block, with water-streaked brick and flickering yellow security lights. A figure waited under the awning, thin, hunched, wearing a rain-soaked hoodie. He waved frantically as we rolled up. "He's upstairs," the man said, as we jumped out with our bags, collapsed right in front of me. "Don't think he's breathing." The hallway reeked faintly of damp carpet and something metallic underneath. The elevator was out, so we took the stairs 2 at a time, the man leading us to the top floor. The flicker of a bare bulb lit the narrow hall, shadows stuttering along the peeling wallpaper. Unit 6B's door was wide open. The apartment inside was dim, lit only by a weak lamp in the corner. On the floor near the couch lay a middle-aged man, flat on his back, shirt half unbuttoned, skin pale with a bluish cast. "Sir, can you hear me?" I called, kneeling beside him. No pulse, no breathing. "Starting compressions," Rios said, dropping to his knees on the other side. I pulled the defib pads from the bag, tearing the packets open as he began the first round of chest compressions. The man's pupils were fixed and dilated, his skin cool under my fingers as I applied the pads. The AED beeped to life, analyzing. "Shock advised." I charged the unit, readying for delivery. "Clear." The man's body jerked as the shock hit, then slumped back to the floor. I moved in to start rescue breaths, tilting his head back, pinching his nose. The faint smell of damp wool clung to him, mixed with something older, sourer. I pressed the mask over his face, sealed it, and gave the first breath. That's when it happened. His lips twitched beneath the mask, just barely. I thought at first it was the air escaping awkwardly, but then soft, raspy, almost inaudible. He whispered my name, my full name. I froze, my hand still holding the mask in place. The bystander hadn't said my name. Rios hadn't used it since we came in. "Everything okay?" Rios asked, still pumping the man's chest. I blinked, shook it off. "Yeah, just yeah." I gave the next breath, convincing myself it had been a trick of the air, the sound of lips moving under pressure. We cycled through compressions and breaths again. The AED called for another shock, and we delivered it. No response. I leaned over to reposition the mask, glancing at his face. His lips were still now, his expression unchanged, but something about the way his mouth rested made me think it hadn't been random. The bystander hovered in the doorway, eyes wide. "Is he?" "Not yet," I said, forcing my voice steady. "We're still working him." But the sound of that whisper clung to me, low and certain, like it hadn't come from reflex at all, like it had been meant for me. I tried to bury it, chalk it up to some odd reflex, a pocket of air forced past the vocal cords by compressions. Things like that happen, but my chest still felt tight as I leaned back over him, focusing on the rhythm of Rios's compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. I switched in, taking over compressions while Rios readied another round on the defib. The AED's cold voice cut through the dim air. "Shock advised." We cleared. The man's body arched against the pads, and then flopped limp again. Rios was already repositioning the bag valve mask, sealing it over the man's mouth and nose. He gave a slow squeeze. The chest rose, and then the man's lips moved again. This time there was no mistaking it. A faint breathy murmur. "Rios." The sound wasn't slurred or broken, it was deliberate, a low rasp like sand sliding over stone. Rios jerked back, the mask slipping from his grip. "Did you hear that?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I heard it the first time too." His eyes narrowed. "First time." I kept working the compressions, not wanting to break the rhythm. When I was giving breaths, he said my name. The bystander in the doorway took a half step back. "He's not like still alive, is he?" Rios glanced at the monitor. "Flatline." "No, there's nothing, not even agonal breathing." The air in the apartment felt heavier somehow, colder. I could hear a faint hum now, almost below hearing range, like a transformer somewhere deep in the walls. We went through another cycle, compressions, breaths, rhythm check, still nothing. But something about the man's chest movements bothered me. During compressions, the rise and fall wasn't quite right. There was a delay, almost like something inside was resisting, then pushing back in its own time. "Bag him again," I said, wanting to test a suspicion. Rios hesitated, then pressed the mask back over his face, and gave a controlled squeeze. The man's lips parted just enough to exhale, not a sigh, not a gasp, but words, faint and raspy. "It's not your time yet." Rios froze, hand still gripping the bag. The bystander made a muffled noise, like he was about to bolt. I stopped compressions, staring down at the man. His eyes remained closed, pupils still fixed. No pulse, no signs of life, and yet the voice had been measured. A choice. The hum in the walls seemed louder now, almost vibrating in the floor, under my knees. "Check the rhythm," Rios said quietly. The monitor still showed a systole, flatline. He looked at me. "This doesn't make sense." No, it didn't. I'd worked dozens of codes. I'd seen muscle twitches, agonal breaths, even what looked like attempts at speech, but never words like this, never the right names, never a sentence. The bystander backed farther into the hole, shaking his head. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm staying out here." Rios and I exchanged a long look. "Another round?" he asked, though his tone carried more hesitation than resolve. I nodded slowly, setting my hands on the man's sternum again. The pads were still in place, the monitor still connected. I counted under my breath, forcing myself back into the rhythm. But the whole time, I couldn't stop hearing it. His voice, calm and certain, saying yet, as if the timing wasn't his decision, but someone else's. The next round started, like all the others, compressions, breaths, monitor check, but the unease sat in my gut, like a weight. The hum in the apartment walls was steady now, almost blending with the AED's faint whine, and every so often, I thought, I felt it in my fingertips when I pressed down on the man's chest. Halfway through the cycle, the monitor beeped. A thin green line appeared, weak and stuttering, then settled into what looked like a bradycardic rhythm. "Got something," Rios said, leaning closer to the screen. I froze with my hands still on the sternum. "Check a pulse." He pressed fingers into the carotid, waiting, his brow furrowed. No pulse. The line on the monitor fluttered, then steadied. 20 seconds, maybe, before flattening again. "Ghost tracing?" I asked, but the words felt hollow. I'd seen artifact rhythms from movement, but this hadn't coincided with compressions. It had started and ended on its own. As the line died back into a flat line, the man's eyelids fluttered, not a twitch, but a slow, deliberate blink. When they opened, his eyes were milky, clouded over like those of someone long dead, and yet, they moved. They tracked Rios first, then me, the pupils fixed, but somehow aware. The breath caught in my throat. "Do you see that?" Rios didn't answer. The man's lips parted slightly. They moved without sound at first, shaping words we couldn't hear. Then a faint rasp escaped, just loud enough for us to catch. Soon, the bystander in the hall swore softly. I reached for the bag mask, needing to break whatever moment this was. Rios handed it over, without a word. I sealed it over the man's mouth and nose squeezed. From somewhere beyond the open apartment door, a floorboard creaked. I froze, the bag still compressed in my hand. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, crossing the hall outside. Rios glanced toward the door, but the manager said we were the only ones on this floor. He did. We both stayed still, listening. The footsteps moved past the open door, pausing just beyond the threshold. I could feel someone's presence there, though no shadow crossed into the room. The man on the floor exhaled, not through the bag mask, but around it. The sound was wet, deliberate, almost conversational. "They're here." I pulled the mask back, the hairs on my arms rising. "Who's here?" No answer. His eyes slid shut again, but not in the slack, lifeless way of a body giving up, more like someone choosing to rest. Rios shook his head, muttering something I couldn't make out, and reached for another amp of epinephrine. We pushed the drug, set up for another shock, and hit him with it. This time, his whole body arched violently, not the controlled jerk of defibrillation, but a sudden, twisting motion, like every muscle had fired at once. Then, without warning, he sat up halfway. No scramble, no gasp for air, just a smooth, unnatural rise until his face was inches from mine. His milky eyes were locked on me now, and I realized his lips weren't moving randomly. He was smiling. The hum in the walls surged louder, and for a moment, I thought I could hear something inside it. Voices, distant and layered, speaking in a rhythm that matched the beat my own heart was trying to keep. Then, in a voice steadier than it had any right to be, he said, "It starts when the radio goes quiet." For a few seconds no one moved. My knees were still pressed into the damp carpet, my hands frozen where they'd been hovering after the last compression. Rios stood rigid, the defib pads in his fists, his gaze fixed on the half-sitting man in front of us. The smile on that pale, cloud-eyed face didn't waver. "How?" Rios began, his voice almost a whisper. The man tilted his head slightly, studying us the way someone might study an insect in a jar. His voice, when it came, was stronger than before, low, deliberate, and disturbingly calm. "You," he said, turning to Rios, "your sister's wedding ring. It's still in the glove compartment of your first car. You'll need it again." Rios's face drained of color. "How do you?" Before he could finish, the man's gaze slid to me. "And you, the back steps of your grandmother's house, the night she died. You thought no one saw you there." My stomach turned cold. That was something I'd never spoken aloud to anyone, not once. He leaned forward just slightly, the tendons in his neck taut. "There's someone waiting. Not here, not yet, but when the radio goes quiet, you'll know, and then you'll hear them." The hum in the walls deepened, and the lamp in the corner flickered hard, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the room. For a moment, the light went out completely, plunging us into darkness, except for the green glow of the monitor. When the lamp came back, the man's face was closer. I don't remember him moving. "You'll want to answer," he said, his lips curling just slightly. "Don't." I wanted to step back, to put distance between us, but my legs felt anchored to the floor. The bystander in the doorway took a sharp breath. "I think I'm gonna wait outside." His voice cut off in a strangled sound, and when I glanced his way, he was already gone, footsteps retreating rapidly down the hall. Rios snapped out of his trance, pressing 2 fingers hard into the man's neck. Still nothing, no pulse. His voice was tight, almost panicked. "This isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't." The man suddenly blinked, slow and deliberate, as if dismissing us. "They're almost here." The hum shifted again, higher this time, almost like a siren far away but warped, dragging in and out of pitch. I forced myself to move, grabbing the bag mask. "Let's finish this, and get him loaded. We can't stay here." We went through the motions again, compressions, airway, drugs, Though my hands felt clumsy, like I was working underwater, I couldn't focus on the rhythm anymore. My ears kept straining for the hum, for the strange half-siren outside the edges of hearing. Then, without any shift in his face, the man collapsed back against the carpet. His eyes stayed open, still cloudy, staring at nothing. The monitor's flatline tone filled the room. Rios leaned over him, listening for breath, checking again for a pulse. He's gone. I sat back on my heels, my heart beat loud in my ears. That was when every light in the apartment went out. The hum didn't fade. It grew sharper, almost electric, vibrating the air between us. The AED screen glowed faintly, casting just enough light to show Rios's wide eyes meeting mine. And then from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, each one closer than the last. The 3 knocks seemed to reverberate through the apartment's walls, sinking into the floor beneath my knees. Rios's head snapped toward the doorway, his breathing quick and shallow. Neither of us spoke. A moment later, the lights flickered once, then steadied. The hum was gone, just like that, as if it had been cut mid-breath. The sudden quiet was almost worse. Rios cleared his throat. "Let's get him out of here." His voice was hoarse, like he'd been holding it back for a while. We moved quickly, packing the gear and loading the man onto the stretcher. His skin was cold and stiffening, but his expression, it had changed. The faint smile was gone, replaced by a slack, almost peaceful blankness. The hallway outside felt different, less claustrophobic without the hum, but still carrying that charged heaviness, like the air before a thunderstorm. The bystander was nowhere in sight. We got the stretcher down the stairs and into the ambulance, without a word. The drizzle had stopped, the night strangely still. Rios took the driver's seat. I climbed into the back with the body, automatically checking the straps, the sheets, the monitor cables, even though there was no need. Habit was easier than thinking. We pulled away from Westbrook Apartments, the building shrinking in the rear windows, until the corner swallowed it. For a few minutes, the only sound was the steady drone of the tires on wet pavement. That's when I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. My name drawn out slow, from somewhere behind me. I froze, glancing at the body. His eyes were still open, clouded and lifeless. His mouth didn't move. The sound came again, louder this time. I turned toward the source, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the onboard radio, mounted above my head. The power was off. I reached for the switch, flicked it on, then off again. The whisper didn't stop. This time it said Rios's name. "Rios," I called toward the cab, my voice shaking. "You hearing this?" He slowed the ambulance a little, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Yeah, I hear it." The whisper came again. Both our names now, one after the other, the same tone the man in the apartment had used. Neither of us said anything the rest of the way to the hospital. When we backed into the bay, the ER staff was waiting. We transferred the body to a gurney, rolling it through the bright, sterile corridors. The charge nurse met us halfway, flipping through paperwork. "Jonathan Cole," she read from the sheet. "No ID on him." "None," Rios said. "Neighbor called it in." She glanced up at us. "That's strange. We have him in our records." I frowned. "From tonight." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "No, from exactly 30 years ago. Same name, same age, same physical description. Declared dead on arrival." I stared at her, waiting for a punchline that didn't come. She just tapped the folder closed and walked away with the gurney. Rios and I stood in the hallway for a moment, neither moving. We headed back to the rig in silence. When I climbed into the passenger seat, the radio crackled once. It was faint, buried under static, but the voice was clear enough to turn my blood to ice. "It's your time now." I looked at Rios. He was already staring at me, his face pale, his hand frozen on the ignition. The radio crackled again, louder this time, repeating both our names. We didn't start the engine. The call came in just after 2 a.m., breaking the stillness of the cab with a burst of static, and the dispatcher's voice, Medic 6, respond to mile marker 14, off County Road 22, female subject, possible assault victim, covered in blood, standing on the roadside, caller disconnected. Delaney glanced at me from the driver's seat. Standing, not lying, that's what she said, I replied, already pulling gloves from the box on the dash. The drive was only 10 minutes, but the further we got from town, the darker the road became. The streetlights gave way to nothing but tree lines, and the occasional glint of guardrails in our headlights. The night was cold, damp enough that mist hovered just above the asphalt, curling away from the tires. We slowed as the GPS ticked closer to the mile marker. The fog was thicker here, spilling across the 2-lane stretch, like a low tide. Delaney eased the rig onto the gravel pull-off, and our headlights swept over her. She stood dead center in the beam, barefoot on the edge of the pavement, wearing a pale nightgown that clung to her skin. The fabric was soaked through, darkened almost entirely by blood. It matted her hair, streaked her arms, ran in rivulets down her calves to pool around her bare feet. Her eyes caught the light for a moment, wide unblinking. Delaney killed the siren, but left the flashes on, bathing the scene in alternating bursts of red and white. We both stepped out slowly. "Ma'am," I called, keeping my tone even. "We're paramedics. We're here to help you." She didn't answer. Her gaze tracked us as we approached, but she didn't move, not a step forward or back. Up close, the metallic smell of blood was thick, clinging to the damp night air. It was fresh, too fresh for someone who wasn't bleeding anymore. Delaney took the lead, his hands visible, voice gentle. "Can you tell us your name? Can you tell me what happened?" She flinched when he reached for her arm, but didn't pull away entirely. I angled my flashlight downward, scanning for wounds, lacerations, punctures, anything. But her skin, where it showed through the soaked fabric, was unbroken. No cuts, no abrasions, nothing to explain the sheer volume of blood soaking her clothes. I crouched a little to check her legs. Same thing, no injuries. The dark stains on her nightgown dripped steadily onto the gravel, the drops bright against the gray stones, yet her skin was as pale and clean as porcelain. Delaney caught my eye over her shoulder. "You seeing this?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Not a scratch." We tried again. "Ma'am, we'd like to get you somewhere safe. We can take you to the hospital and make sure you're okay." Her gaze shifted briefly to the ambulance, then back to us. No words, no expression beyond that blank stare. I pulled a blanket from the trauma bag, draping it gently over her shoulders. The fabric soaked up more of the blood instantly, heavy in my hands. "Let's get her inside," I murmured. Delaney nodded, guiding her toward the back of the rig. She walked willingly enough, but every few steps she glanced into the trees lining the road, her head turning slightly, as though checking for something or someone. When we reached the open rear doors, I gestured to the stretcher. "Go ahead and sit here for me." She lowered herself onto it without protest, the blanket pooling in her lap. Blood dripped from the hem of her gown onto the floor, each drop loud in the quiet. I knelt beside her, shining the light one last time over her arms, chest and legs. Nothing, not a single wound, and yet, the blood kept coming. Delaney climbed into the driver's seat, while I secured her in the back, pulling the stretcher straps snug, but not tight enough to make her flinch again. Up close, the smell of blood was suffocating in the confined space, a thick, metallic tang that clung to the air. The puddle beneath her was spreading across the rubberized floor, warm enough to steam faintly in the cold night air, wafting in from the still open doors. She kept her gaze fixed on the rear corner of the ambulance, as though there was something there I couldn't see. Her posture was unnervingly still, no shivering, no restless shifting, just that same vacant, unblinking stare. "All right," I said, reaching for a set of vitals. "We're going to get you checked out. This might feel cold." I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her arm. Her skin was ice cold, almost clammy, but her pulse under my fingertips was steady and strong. The reading came back textbook normal, heart rate 74, oxygen saturation 99%. "Vitals are fine," I muttered under my breath. I set the cuff aside and pulled a sterile wipe from the kit, intending to clear at least one of her hands to see if there was an injury hidden beneath the gore. As soon as the wipe touched her skin, the blood smeared easily away, revealing pale, unbroken flesh beneath. No cuts, no scratches. But here's the part that made my stomach knot. Under the flashlight beam, I could see the streak of blood I'd just wiped away fading even from the wipe itself. The crimson seemed to lose color, leaching into a pale brown stain before my eyes. I blinked hard and checked her arm again. The skin was clean, almost impossibly so, as if she'd just been washed. "Delaney," I called forward, my voice low, "you're gonna want to hear this. There's no wound, none, and it's disappearing." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his brows furrowed. "What do you mean disappearing?" I held up the wipe. "It's fading, like it was never there." Before he could respond, I noticed her arms again. The patches of exposed skin were clean now, but as I watched, the dark red seeped back through the fabric of her nightgown. It spread in irregular patches, warm drops falling to the floor. I looked up sharply. She was staring at me now for the first time. Her lips parted, and in a low, almost conversational tone, she said, "It's not mine." The words were so calm they almost didn't register as the first thing she'd said since we found her. I swallowed. "Whose is it?" Her expression didn't change, but her gaze drifted back to that same empty corner of the ambulance. A faint smile tugged at the edge of her mouth, and she began to laugh. It wasn't loud, just a quiet, steady chuckle that didn't fit the stillness of her posture. The sound crawled along my spine, soft but constant, like she was laughing at a private joke. "Ma'am?" I tried, forcing my voice to stay level. "We're almost to the hospital. Just sit tight." She tilted her head slightly, the laughter fading as suddenly as it had started. When I looked down at the floor again, the puddle beneath her was larger, too large for someone with no injury, too large to have come from her body at all. I sat back slowly, my gloved hands resting on my knees, and realized the only thing more unnerving than the fact that the blood wasn't hers was that it was still fresh. The laugh cut off so abruptly, it was as if someone had pressed mute. She didn't look at me this time, just kept her eyes fixed on the same rear corner of the rig, her lips slightly parted, breath slow and steady. I checked the monitor again. Every number was normal, heart rate in the 70s, oxygen perfect, blood pressure right where it should be. There was no physiological reason for the amount of blood soaking the stretcher, pooling across the floor and swaying with the motion of the ambulance. I crouched lower to examine her clothing more closely. The stains were fresh again, darker now, as if they'd been reapplied. When I touched the hem of her gown, the warmth of it seeped through my glove. "You said it's not yours," I reminded her, my voice low, trying not to sound as unsettled as I felt. "Then whose is it?" Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment before sliding back to the corner. "It finds me," she said softly. "It always finds me." I hesitated. "What does?" She didn't answer. Instead, a slow wet sound drew my attention downward. The blood on the floor wasn't just spreading anymore, it was moving. The puddle was rippling in uneven waves, like something underneath was shifting it. I glanced toward the front. "Delaney," I called, "are you seeing this?" He glanced into the rearview mirror, his brow tightening. "Seeing what?" Before I could answer, the movement stopped. The puddle was just blood again, still and silent. I turned back to the woman. She had stopped staring at the corner, and was looking directly at me now. Her expression was flat, but her eyes, there was something behind them, something aware. "You weren't fast enough," she said. The words made no sense. For what? She leaned forward just enough that I could hear her without her voice rising. "Last time, I almost made it. But it was right there, and I couldn't." She trailed off, looking past me toward the rear doors. A sudden, violent thud hit the outside of the rig, loud enough to make the walls shudder. I jumped back instinctively, my knee hitting the supply cabinet. Delaney swore from the front. What the hell was that? Another slam, harder this time, rattled the latches on the cabinets. It came from directly against the rear doors. I grabbed the handrail overhead to steady myself. "Don't stop." "I'm not," Delaney called, his voice tight. "We're still doing 60. The woman's head tilted toward the sound, her mouth curling into the faintest smile. "It followed me here," she murmured. The metallic scent in the air intensified, thick enough that I could almost taste it. The walls of the rig seemed to hum faintly, the vibration running through the metal beneath my hands. Another slam. The doors flexed just enough for me to see the locking pins shift in their slots. I moved closer to her. "What's out there?" Her smile didn't change. "You'll know soon." One last impact rang through the rig, so forceful it jolted the stretcher wheels against the floor locks. Then, silence. I waited, holding my breath, listening for another hit, for footsteps, for anything. But there was only the low drone of the tires on asphalt, and the steady beep of the monitor. The woman relaxed against the stretcher again, her eyes closing as if she'd said all she needed to say. And under the blanket draped over her lap, I saw the blood starting to seep through again, warm, bright, and absolutely fresh. For several long minutes, neither Delaney nor I spoke. The hum of the tires was the only sound, but I could feel both of us listening for that slam against the doors again. The woman, though, seemed almost serene now. Her eyes opened and fixed on the rear doors. "It's still here," she said softly, as if commenting on the weather. I followed her gaze, half expecting to see the shadow of someone clinging to the doors through the small tinted window. But the glass showed only the streaking lines of roadside fog, illuminated by our tail lights. Delaney's voice came over his shoulder. "We've got about 6 minutes to the hospital. Just hang tight." The woman's head tilted slightly, and she smiled, a small knowing expression. "It won't go in there. It never does." Something about the certainty in her tone made the back of my neck prickle. A faint hiss came from the radio mounted above my head. It wasn't the usual static. This was sharper, more erratic, like the sound of air escaping a cracked valve. I glanced at the power knob. The unit was turned off. Then, threaded under the hiss, came voices, faint, overlapping, impossible to make out individually, but undeniably human. The tones weren't panicked, they were deliberate, measured, almost chanting. "Delaney," I called forward. "Do you hear that?" He flicked a glance into the mirror. "Hear what?" The woman's eyes widened slightly, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "They're talking to it." The smell hit next. It was so sudden, so strong, it made my throat tighten. The raw, coppery tang of blood, but heavier, almost spoiled. I pulled my glove over my nose and mouth, but it did nothing. Condensation began forming on the inside of the rear windows. Even though the heater was running, it streaked in uneven trails, some of which seemed to curve upward before running down again, as though drawn by an invisible finger. A low creak came from the left-hand door hinge, followed by a slow, deliberate tap. Once, twice, 3 times. The woman laughed quietly, her voice low and almost affectionate. "It's patient tonight." I moved closer to the doors, keeping my hand on the rail overhead. "Whatever's out there, it can't open these," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure who I was trying to convince. The tapping stopped. For a moment the only sound was the hiss of the radio and the low thrum of the engine. Then, without warning, a fine mist of blood sprayed from the woman's hairline, dotting the white interior walls and my gloves. I flinched back. "She's bleeding." Delaney hit the brakes just enough to slow. "Where?" I parted her matted hair, searching with my penlight. Her scalp was unbroken, the skin beneath my gloved fingertips was smooth, dry, yet the streaks on the wall and floor were still warm and wet. She smiled again, closing her eyes briefly. "That's not from me." Before I could reply, the radio's hiss surged into a single voice, louder now, deep and distorted, almost mechanical. "Not fast enough." Delaney's eyes met mine in the mirror. "Was that?" The woman leaned forward, her voice suddenly cold and certain. "You'll smell it soon." The lights flickered once, and then the entire rig went dark. Every panel, every monitor, every bulb, leaving us in absolute blackness. Somewhere beyond the rear doors, something dragged slowly along the metal, the sound like nails over a coffin lid. The darkness inside the rig felt heavier than the night outside, thick and pressing, as though the air itself had weight. I couldn't even make out my own hands in front of me, only the faint outlines where the woman and the stretcher were supposed to be. "Delaney," I called, my voice low, but urgent. "I'm here," he answered from the cab. His voice was tight, controlled, the way people sound when they're forcing down panic. "Power's dead, all of it." From the blackness came the soft hiss of breath, slow, deliberate, but not from her. It was close to my left ear, too close, and the temperature dropped so sharply, it made my skin ache. Then the smell hit. It wasn't the metallic tang of fresh blood this time. It was thicker, fouler, old blood, rotting meat, the sourness of something long dead. I gagged behind my glove, but the odor seemed to fill my lungs, no matter how I tried to breathe around it. There was movement in front of me, subtle but unmistakable, the faint scrape of skin against fabric, a shift of weight on the stretcher. "Don't," the woman whispered. Her voice was clear now, almost gentle. "If you move it'll know." The dragging sound outside started again, slow and methodical, tracing the edges of the rear doors. A pause, then 3 deliberate knocks. The blackness pressed harder against my eyes, and for a split second I thought I saw something in it. An outline, hunched and wrong, its limbs too long, its head angled in a way no neck should bend. It stood just on the other side of the glass, though I couldn't truly see the glass itself. The knocks came again. Then as suddenly as it had gone, the power returned. Lights flickered back on, monitors beeped to life, and the engine's hum filled the space. The stretcher was in its place, the woman lying calmly on it, her eyes closed. The walls were clean, no blood, no condensation. I looked at my gloves, dry, my boots dry. Even the smell was gone, as though it had never been there. Delaney turned in his seat. "You okay back there?" I opened my mouth, but the woman's eyes snapped open before I could speak. She looked straight at me, and smiled faintly. "Told you it wouldn't go in there." The rest of the trip was silent. She didn't speak again, didn't laugh, didn't so much as glance toward the corner she'd been fixated on earlier. Her vitals stayed perfect. When we rolled into the ER bay, a pair of nurses came out to receive her. She stepped down from the stretcher on her own, and walked inside without looking back. Inside, while we gave the intake report, one of the nurses frowned at the chart. "She's not in our system." "No ID on her either." "None," I said. The nurse scribbled something down, then glanced toward the hallway where she'd vanished. "Well, we'll figure it out. You two can go ahead and restock." Back in the rig I started wiping down the interior, out of habit. My cloth came away wet. I stared at it, bright red soaking into the fibers, fresh enough to bead. "Delaney," I said, my voice low, "come here." He leaned in, saw the cloth and froze. "Where?" I gestured toward the ceiling panel above the stretcher. A single drop of blood swelled there, quivering, before it broke loose and fell, landing squarely on my shoulder. It was still warm. The rain had been steady all night, a fine mist that blurred the streetlights into dull halos and made the blacktop shine under the ambulance's headlights. Mendez kept the wipers at their slowest setting, the blades sighing across the windshield in a steady rhythm. The cab smelled faintly of wet rubber and coffee gone stale. We'd been called for a body transport from a small rural ER to the county morgue, a 40-minute drive, nothing unusual. We'd done it dozens of times, the kind of job where you don't rush, but you also don't linger. The patient was a middle-aged male, early 50s, found unresponsive at home, cardiac arrest, pronounced dead just before midnight. His name, Daniel Krause, was printed neatly on the toe tag that dangled from his right foot inside the zipped black body bag. Cause of death, pending autopsy. I was in the back with him, sitting on the fold-down jump seat beside the gurney. The heater was running, but the air back here never seemed to hold warmth the way the cab did. I kept my gloves on, arms folded loosely, my eyes wandering between the bag and the rain streaking the side windows. The road was smooth, no potholes, no sudden curves, but every so often, I thought I felt the gurney shift. Not a jolt from the wheels, but a subtle redistribution of weight, like the center of gravity was changing. I told myself it was just the sway of the rig. Mendez's voice came over the intercom. "How's it looking back there? Still dead?" I said. My attempt at humor fell flat in the empty space. We'd been on the road, maybe 20 minutes, when the first odd thing happened. The straps holding the gurney made a faint creak, like they'd been pulled against. I leaned forward, checking them. They were secure, nothing out of place. I sat back down, trying not to let the sound stick in my mind. Outside, the rain thickened, hissing against the roof. The side windows had fogged enough that all I could see were shapes, trees, fence lines, the occasional flash of a reflective sign. Another few minutes passed, and that's when I heard it. A faint, deliberate sound from the gurney. Not the creak of a strap this time, more like the rasp of a zipper. I stared at the body bag. The noise came again, louder now. A slow, steady motion from mid-chest to the top of the bag, the metal teeth parting. "Mendez," I said into the mic, my voice sharper this time. "You might want to." The rest caught in my throat. The zipper slid the rest of the way open from the inside. A pale hand emerged first, fingers curling over the edge, nails faintly discolored, then the other hand, pushing down against the stretcher rail. The upper half of the bag peeled back in one smooth motion. Daniel Krause sat up. There was no gasp for breath, no cough, no confusion in his eyes. His posture was rigid, his skin ashen, lips pale, and then slowly, deliberately, his mouth stretched into a smile. Not the reflexive slack grin of a seizure or death spasm, a real smile, the kind you give when you've just recognized someone. I froze in place, my hands gripping the seat beneath me. The rain drummed harder against the roof, and in the cab, Mendez called over the intercom. What the hell was that? I couldn't answer. Daniel Krause was still looking right at me, his smile fixed, and his eyes were following me exactly, like he'd been awake the whole ride. Mendez hit the brakes hard enough that the gurney lurched forward in its locks, nearly throwing me into it. The sudden stop made Daniel Krause's head tilt slightly to the side, but the smile didn't falter, not even for a second. I pushed back against the wall, every nerve in my body firing at once. "Mendez," I said, my voice low, "he's sitting up." There was a sharp rustle of movement from the cab, then the sound of Mendez fumbling with the latch that separated us. "That's not funny, I'm not joking." The latch popped, and he leaned halfway into the back, eyes locking on the scene in front of me, his face drained of color. Holy. Daniel's eyes shifted to Mendez, tracking him with slow precision, the way you follow something in a rearview mirror. His skin was cold to the point of looking waxy, but his gaze was sharp. "Check him," Mendez said, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed to stay away, but muscle memory took over. I grabbed my stethoscope and stepped toward him, careful, as if approaching a wild animal. I pressed 2 fingers against the side of his neck. Nothing, no pulse. I pulled back the bag far enough to place my stethoscope on his chest. It was silent, no heartbeat, no air movement. His skin was so cold it felt like metal under the thin hospital gown, and yet his head turned with me. When I moved, I stepped back, my own pulse thudding in my ears. "No vitals," I said, keeping my eyes on him. His lips began to move, the smile still fixed in place. At first, no sound came, just the shape of words. Then on a long, slow exhale, he whispered my full name. Not my first name, not the short version people used at work, my full legal name, the one I hadn't heard spoken aloud since my mother used it when I was a kid. The sound of it coming from that cold, smiling mouth made my knees feel weak. Mendez swore under his breath. "How the hell?" Before he could finish, Daniel's head tilted farther to the side, far enough that the angle was unnatural, like his neck was a hinge. His eyes stayed locked on me. The smile didn't waver. Then without warning, he leaned back, lowering himself onto the gurney, as if settling in for a nap. But his eyes stayed open, watching. The body bag was still peeled back to his waist, the toe tag swinging slightly with the motion of the rig. The stretcher began to tremble, not violently, just a faint rhythmic shaking, like something was moving underneath it. Mendez gripped the doorway between the cab and the patient compartment. "We need to strap him down again." "I'm not touching him," I said. The shaking intensified, the wheels rattling faintly against the floor locks. Daniel's hands stayed folded on his abdomen, but the gurney moved, as though responding to his breath, except he wasn't breathing. I reached for the straps, my gloves slick with sweat, and tightened them across his chest and thighs. The shaking slowed, then stopped altogether. Mendez looked at me, his jaw tight. "We're 10 minutes from the morgue. We can make it." I glanced down. Daniel's smile was still there, unbroken, his eyes unblinking. In the cab, the rain had quieted, but inside the rig, the silence was worse, because the longer I stood there, the more I was certain that he wasn't just looking at me. He was waiting. The straps should have reassured me, but they didn't. Daniel lay still, eyes open, smile fixed, head tilted at that strange angle. The gurney's wheels no longer rattled, yet I kept my hand on the rail, as if I expected them to start again. I decided to check him once more, maybe to prove to myself that what I was seeing wasn't what it felt like. I slid my gloved fingers back to his neck. Still no pulse. His skin was like stone, left out in winter, dense cold, unmoving. But as I held there, I realized his chest was rising and falling, shallow, irregular movements, completely out of sync with anything resembling human breathing. It was like the motion of a bellows, mechanical, purposeful, without the rhythm of life. "Mendez," I said quietly, "he's moving." From the cab, Mendez glanced into the mirror. "Not on my watch he isn't." The heater was still on, but I could see my breath puff faintly in the air. The cold seemed to be coming from the gurney itself, bleeding out into the small compartment. Gooseflesh prickled my arms beneath my jacket. Then his right hand twitched, not a spasm. 3 sharp, deliberate taps against the gurney rail. A pause, then 3 more. I stepped back, my shoulder pressing into the supply cabinet. "Did you see that?" Mendez's eyes flicked between the road and the mirror. "Tell me you didn't just say he's tapping." The taps came again, slow, measured, the sound of knuckles rapping metal. I leaned forward just enough to see his fingers, stiff, pale, but moving with intent. "That's not a reflex," I said. Mendez was silent for a moment. Then, without looking back, he said, "I know that face." It caught me off guard. "What?" "I've seen him before." 4 years ago, car crash on Route 19. Guy was DOA. Same look, same name, Daniel Kraus. I drove him to the morgue myself. That's not possible, I said, though the word possible felt hollow in my mouth. I remember because, his voice faltered, because that night, on the way there, I swore I saw the body move in the rear view, but when we unloaded him, he was back the way he'd been. The tapping stopped. For a few long seconds, the only sound was the hum of the tires on wet pavement. Wogga, wogga, mogga, mogga, wogga, mogga. Then Daniel's torso rose again, not slowly this time, but with a fluid, almost graceful motion that pulled him upright, despite the straps across his chest. His head swiveled toward me. That same smile. You took the wrong one, he said. To Mendez. Ick said. The voice was low, certain, and entirely out of place in a body with no heartbeat. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? He didn't answer. His gaze moved past me, toward the front, as if he could see straight through the wall, into the cab. Mendez must have felt it, because his voice came over the intercom, tight and clipped. Don't talk to him. I didn't move, didn't speak. Daniel slowly leaned back again, settling against the stretcher. His eyes never closed. The straps strained faintly, like they were under more pressure than before. The faint sound of the rain outside faded, until I couldn't hear it at all. In the silence, the cold deepened, and then 3 more taps against the gurney rail, slower this time, like he was making sure I understood. Mendez's voice cracked through the intercom again, sharper now. We're getting off this road. I don't care if it adds an hour. We're stopping somewhere with lights and people. I didn't answer. My eyes were still locked on Daniel Kraus, his pale fingers resting lightly on the metal rail, as if he'd never tapped it at all. The straps across his chest and thighs held, but it didn't matter. I'd already seen how easily he could sit up. Then he spoke again, his voice cutting through the stillness. You think the road will help you? I stiffened. He hadn't moved his lips much, just enough to form the words, but the sound was clear, deliberate. Mendez must have heard, because the rig swerved slightly before correcting. He's talking now. Yes, I said, my voice low. Daniel's head turned, inch by inch, until his eyes met mine. You've both been here before. The way he said it made the hair on my arms lift. I shook my head, trying to keep my breathing steady. No, we haven't. He smiled wider. You just don't remember. Mendez cursed under his breath. I'm pulling over. But before he could, the inside lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely, leaving us in the dim red glow of the dashboard through the pass-through window. The heater kicked off. The cold came back instantly, sharper now, the kind that feels wet against your skin. My breath fogged in front of me, and then the radio came alive. It wasn't dispatch. It wasn't even a clear channel, just static at first, hissing loud in the small space. Then under the static, I heard screaming, faint at first, like it was coming from far away. Multiple voices, layered over each other. Men, women, a child, none of it distinct, all of it desperate. Daniel tilted his head toward the sound. Do you hear them? I didn't answer. They've been waiting, he said. So long. The screaming grew louder, mixed now with what sounded like pounding, like fists on a door far away. Mendez fumbled with the radio, but every time he switched channels, the same noise came through. Then Daniel leaned forward against the straps, his face only a foot from mine. His eyes rolled back, and when they returned, the irises were gone, nothing but solid black voids. It's not me you should be afraid of, he whispered. My throat tightened. Then who? He didn't speak, but the radio did. The screaming stopped, replaced by a single voice, a low, male whisper, distorted like it was underwater, said my name, slowly, twice. Mendez slammed the rig into gear. We're almost to the morgue. Hold it together. The lights inside the patient compartment flickered back on, but the cold didn't lift. Daniel settled back against the gurney, that same unnatural smile returning to his face. The straps across his chest twitched like they'd been pulled from underneath. The toe tag swung gently, though the rig wasn't moving fast enough to make it sway. I sat back, gripping the seat edge, eyes locked on him, because I realized now that Daniel wasn't the threat, he was the warning, and whatever he was warning us about was already in the rig with us. The city lights never looked so far away. Every turn we made felt longer than it should have been, the dark pressing in like we were driving through something thicker than air. Daniel didn't move again, but the sense of being watched never left. It wasn't just him, it was the space between us, the air around me, the faint shifts in shadow that didn't match the motion of the rig. Mendez kept talking from the cab, mostly to fill the silence. 2 more minutes, just 2 more, and we're done. We unload, we hand him over, and that's it. But I was staring at Daniel, and I knew that wasn't it. The radio hadn't made another sound since that last whisper, but the memory of it still clung to my skin. My name, drawn out like a slow exhale, echoed in my head. As we pulled into the county morgue lot, the world outside the windshield seemed wrong. The rain was still falling, but not a single drop hit the glass. It was like we were in a bubble, everything muffled and distant. Mendez killed the engine, and for a second, the silence was so complete, I could hear the faint squeak of my gloves as I clenched my hands. "Let's get this over with," he said, climbing out. The rear doors swung open, letting in the dim yellow glow from the lot's only working light. I rolled the gurney forward, the straps still tight across Daniel's unmoving body. The morgue's side entrance was just ahead, a heavy metal door with a single square window. The closer we got, the more I noticed the glass was black, like the window was covered on the inside. No light came through it. Mendez fished for the buzzer, pressing it twice. No answer. He pressed again. Still nothing. The air felt heavier. My ears popped, like we'd driven up a mountain in the last 30 seconds. Then the window in the door cleared, not all at once, more like something inside was leaning away from it. A face looked out. It wasn't anyone from the morgue staff. It wasn't even anyone alive. The skin was pale and loose, the eyes dark pits that seemed to drink in the light from the lot. The lips stretched into a smile too wide for a human mouth. I froze. Mendez didn't see it. He was looking down at the buzzer, muttering about calling dispatch. The face didn't blink, didn't move, but the glass fogged faintly in front of its mouth, like it was breathing against it. Then, so softly, I almost missed it. It spoke. "Bring him inside." I stepped back from the door, my grip tightening on the gurney handle. Daniel's smile, unchanged since we left the hospital, seemed to deepen, just enough to show the edge of his teeth. "Mendez," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. "We shouldn't." The door unlocked, with a heavy click, swinging inward on its own. The darkness beyond was complete. No light, no sound, just a hallway swallowed in black. Mendez grabbed the front of the gurney. "Come on. The sooner we roll him in, the sooner we're done." I didn't move. The air spilling from the doorway was ice cold, colder than the morgue ever should have been. Daniel's head tilted toward me, his eyes still that endless black. "You'll follow," he said. I let go of the gurney. Mendez shot me a look, confused, but pushed Daniel inside on his own. The door closed behind them, with a sound like a vault ceiling shut. I was alone in the lot, but when I turned toward the ambulance, there was someone sitting in the back, watching me from the shadows, smiling. We got the call just after 9, the kind of job that sounded routine on paper. "Possible medical distress," dispatch said. reported noises from inside a residence. The address was on the edge of town, where street lights turned into stretches of blacktop, and old farmhouses sat swallowed by overgrowth. I was in the passenger seat, riding with Mason, who was still sipping lukewarm coffee from the station. "Probably some squatters," he muttered, turning down the narrow road, "or kids messing around. Neighbors get jumpy out here." The house appeared out of the darkness, like it had been waiting for us. 2 stories, paint long peeled away, windows dark. The porch sagged under the weight of neglect, weeds pressing in from all sides. No lights, no cars, nothing that said someone lived there. Mason cut the siren. As we pulled into the overgrown driveway, the air felt colder than it had a minute ago, enough that I zipped up my jacket. The neighbor who called it in was nowhere to be seen, so we approached the house ourselves. The front door was unlocked, the hinges groaning as Mason pushed it open. The smell hit first: dust, rot, something damp lingering in the air. My flashlight beam cut through layers of cobwebs, revealing faded wallpaper curling from the walls. A moth drifted lazily out of the dark and disappeared again. No signs of life. We started a slow sweep, our boots crunching over scattered debris. Old newspapers lay in piles, dates from over a decade ago. Furniture sat under yellowed sheets, shapes of a living room frozen mid-exit. "Mason," I said quietly, "this place looks like no one's been here in years." He nodded, glancing toward the staircase. "Then where'd the noise come from?" We both froze when it happened. A faint sound from somewhere above us, high-pitched, muffled. It took a few seconds to realize what it was. A baby crying. The sound was strange in the stillness, carrying just enough to set my teeth on edge. It didn't sound distressed exactly, just persistent, a steady, wavering wail. Mason frowned. "You hearing that?" "Yeah," I said. Upstairs. We moved cautiously, our flashlights cutting across the narrow hall. The stairs groaned under our weight as we climbed, each step amplifying the sound. The crying seemed to grow closer, then farther away again, like the source kept shifting. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. Several doors lined either side, all closed. The sound seemed to be coming from the one at the far end, a warped wooden door with peeling white paint. Mason reached it first, trying the handle. Locked. "Ma'am, sir, paramedics," he called, knocking lightly. The crying continued, unchanged. I moved closer, pressing my ear to the wood. The sound was right there. Thin walls, no more than a few feet between me and it. Mason stepped back and gave the door a hard shoulder. It splintered around the latch and swung open with a protesting groan. The crying stopped instantly. We both stepped inside, flashlights sweeping the corners. The room was empty, completely. No crib, no blankets, no signs of a child at all. Just bare wooden floors layered with dust, so thick our footprints marked the first disturbance in years. Mason looked at me, brows furrowed. "Tell me you heard that too." I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the far wall. The dust there was disturbed, 3 faint streaks running vertically, like something had been dragged down it. The silence pressed in heavier than the dark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't walked into an empty house at all, just one that didn't want us to know what else was here. We stood in that bare room, longer than we should have, both of us trying to listen past the silence, straining for any hint the crying might return. But there was nothing, just the creak of the old house under its own weight. Mason broke the stillness. Could have been outside. Sound carries weird in places like this. I wanted to believe that, but I'd heard it too clearly through the door. The pitch, the rhythm, it had been right there with us. We stepped back into the hall, our boots sinking softly into a layer of dust that seemed undisturbed, except for our own prints. Mason was about to head downstairs when it started again. The baby's cry, only this time, it wasn't above us, it was below. We both froze, exchanging a look before Mason started down the stairs. I followed, every step feeling heavier, like the air was thickening around us. The sound grew sharper, the closer we got to the bottom, still muffled, but with a strange echo, as if it wasn't coming from a single room. When we reached the ground floor, the crying cut off. I scanned the living room with my flashlight. Nothing, same as before, furniture under dust, drapes hanging in tatters, an old brick fireplace blackened with age. Then faint but clear, the sound started again, this time from the back of the house. We moved through a narrow hallway toward the kitchen, our lights catching glimpses of peeling linoleum and rusted fixtures. At the far end, a door stood half open, revealing a shadowed space beyond. The crying swelled as we approached. I nudged the door wider, revealing a small room. My light landed on an old wooden cradle in the center. It rocked gently back and forth, the creak of its joints matching the rhythm of the wail. There was no baby. I took a slow step forward. "Mason, yeah," he said behind me, his voice tight. "I see it." The crying abruptly changed, sharper now, more urgent, like the baby was in pain. The cradle rocked harder, the legs thumping against the floorboards. Mason moved closer, crouching to look inside. His flashlight revealed only a stained, moth-eaten blanket. No footprints, no signs anyone had been in the room to set it in motion. Without warning, the cradle stopped, the crying cut off mid-breath. The silence was immediate and heavy. Then we both heard it, footsteps above us, slow, deliberate, moving across the floor we'd just walked on moments ago. We stood perfectly still, listening, as the steps passed overhead and paused directly above the cradle. Mason straightened. "We just came from there." I didn't answer. The house felt wrong. Now, not just abandoned, but aware, like it knew we were here, and was shifting itself to keep us inside. We backed out of the room, keeping our lights sweeping in every direction. The moment we stepped into the hallway, the footsteps above us started again, crossing toward the stairs. "Move," Mason muttered. We circled back toward the front, but somehow found ourselves in the same central hallway again, even though we'd turned twice. I stopped, trying to make sense of it, but the crying started again, this time somewhere between a wail and a word, as if it were trying to speak. I didn't want to hear what it had to say, and I had the sinking feeling it wasn't done with us yet. We regrouped in the hallway, both of us breathing harder than we should have been. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet you trust. It was that thick, waiting silence that felt like it could split at any second. Mason unclipped his radio and called dispatch. "Unit 4 here. Can you confirm the original report? Who exactly called this in?" There was a pause, a bit of static. Then the dispatcher replied. "Neighbor across the street. Said they heard strange noises." "You find anyone?" "Not yet," Mason said. "Can you check property history on this address? Current residents?" We waited, while dispatch dug. I found myself staring at the staircase, remembering the way the crying had seemed to pull us around like it knew where we'd go next. A minute later, dispatch came back on. "Copy, Mason. House has been listed vacant for over 20 years. No utilities. Belonged to the Langford family. 2 parents, 1 infant son. Parents were found deceased inside. Infant was never recovered. Case is still open. Last incident on record was multiple noise complaints about a baby crying, but responding officers never found a source." My mouth went dry. "What year was that?" I asked into the radio. A short pause. "Same year as the deaths, 1999. Mason muttered something under his breath, clipping the radio back. "This doesn't make sense. That cradle in the back room, it looked older than us." I thought about the blanket inside, the way the wood had rocked like invisible hands were pushing it. We started moving again, this time heading toward the kitchen. My light swept over cracked tiles and a row of cabinets sagging on rusted hinges. One door hung open, revealing an old silver rattle half buried in dust. When I picked it up, the metal was ice cold, and my palm came away faintly damp, as if someone had just been holding it. The crying started again, but now it wasn't muffled. It was sharp, close, and echoing from all around us. The sound bounced off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell where it originated. Then, underneath the cry, there was something else. Low, broken syllables, a voice trying to form words. Mason looked at me. "You hear that?" I nodded. "It's talking." The pitch rose, and suddenly, I understood fragments, not sentences, just a name, repeated in a childlike gasp. Sam, Sam, Sam. I remembered what dispatch had said. Samuel Langford. The air in the kitchen shifted. The overhead light flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Our flashlights became the only glow, beams cutting through dust motes that seemed to swirl faster now. From somewhere inside the walls came a series of dull thuds, like fists pounding wood. The crying spiked in volume, rattling inside my skull. We followed it to the far wall, where the noise was loudest. The wallpaper there was ripped in vertical strips, exposing dark wood beneath. In that wood, I could see faint scratches, tiny, desperate gouges that didn't belong to an adult's hand. Mason's voice was tight. "I think it's inside the walls." That was when something moved just behind the gouges, shadows shifting in a space too narrow for a person. The crying stopped, and then, in a whisper so soft I thought I imagined it, the voice on the other side of the wall said, "Help me." I wished it hadn't. Mason didn't wait. He dropped to his knees, pulled the multi-tool from his belt, and started prying at the warped wood where the wallpaper had peeled. I kept my light steady on the spot, the beam trembling just slightly in my grip. The old nails gave way with reluctant squeals, each one louder than the last in the silence of the house. The moment the first board came free, a wave of air rolled out, cold, damp, and foul, like it had been trapped for decades. Inside the wall was a narrow void no wider than a coffin. My light caught on something pale. A small moldewed blanket bunched in the corner, its faded stitching showing the faint outline of a teddy bear. Beside it lay a silver rattle, tarnished and blackened, but unmistakably the same as the one I'd found in the kitchen. My stomach turned when I saw the wood surrounding them, gouges everywhere, tiny scratches, hundreds of them, some no bigger than a fingernail, carved deep into the grain. Mason froze, his hand resting on the edge of the opening. "These aren't from rats," he said quietly. I didn't answer. The crying was gone, but the silence felt charged, like a held breath. Then the smell hit me harder. Wet rot, rust, and something faintly metallic that made the back of my throat tighten. I leaned closer to the gap, my light passing over the blanket again. And that's when I saw it. Something moved. Not fast, just a subtle shift, like the fabric settling on its own. But the boards beneath the blanket creaked, and the blanket puffed up slightly, as if something underneath was drawing a breath. I stumbled back, nearly knocking into the counter. Mason stepped forward, lifting his light to get a better look. "Careful," I whispered, though I didn't know why. He reached in, fingers brushing the blanket. That's when the screaming started. Not the thin, distant wail we'd heard before. This was deafening, right in the room with us. It was the cry of a baby, but distorted, deeper, too loud for lungs that small. The sound hit me in the chest, vibrating my ribs. The cradle in the other room began to rock violently, the thuds against the floorboards in perfect rhythm with the scream. Somewhere upstairs, doors slammed open and shut in rapid succession, like a stampede moving through empty halls. Mason yanked his hand back, but the screaming didn't stop. In fact, It got louder, so loud I swore the walls were shaking. Then just as suddenly, silence. I blinked hard, ears ringing. My flashlight beam wavered across the now still blanket, and that's when I noticed the temperature. It had dropped so low, my breath came out in clouds. Mason's hand shook as he reached for his radio. Before he could speak into it, the front door slammed somewhere in the distance, not just shut, locked. I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding into place from the inside. Mason's eyes met mine. "We're not alone in here." A soft sound drifted from the opening in the wall, wet, dragging, like something shifting its weight in the darkness. Then from just inches inside, came a whisper. It wasn't a baby this time. It was a man's voice, low and calm, saying both our names. And it knew how to say them perfectly. The sound of our names in that voice hit harder than any scream. My gut twisted. It wasn't just the fact that it knew us. It was how it said them, slowly, deliberately, with the kind of familiarity you can't fake. Mason jerked his light toward the gap in the wall. "Who's in there?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain in it. No answer, just a faint shuffle, like something pulling back into deeper darkness. We didn't wait. Mason grabbed my arm, and we headed for the front door at a pace just shy of running. His flashlight beam danced wildly along the hall, catching glimpses of faded portraits, warped floorboards, and the shadow of the cradle still in motion, even though the air was still. The door was locked, just like we'd heard. Mason rattled the handle, then slammed his shoulder into the wood, but it didn't budge. Behind us, a new sound rose, a soft cooing, almost playful, coming from the hallway we'd just left. It was the same pitch as the baby's cry, but slowed down, stretched out, like someone was mimicking it. We spun, flashlights catching only dust and empty space. The sound moved quickly, passing from doorway to doorway along the hall, circling closer. Mason drew the pry bar from his belt. "We're making our own way out." He moved to the nearest window, smashing through the glass in one blow. But instead of the night outside, there was just black, not the absence of light. This was something thicker, denser, like a wall of shadow that pressed against the shards of glass, without letting anything through. I stepped back, bile rising. "That's not outside." The cooing stopped. The air shifted, heavy and electric. My skin prickled, as if the house itself were leaning in to listen. Then came the crying again, but this time it was everywhere, above us, below us, inside the walls, as if the whole structure had become a lung, and was wailing through every plank and nail. Over the noise, Mason shouted, "Back to the opening in the wall." I didn't want to, but moving away from the sound felt worse than going toward it. We reached the gap in the kitchen wall, but it had changed. The blanket was gone. The space was deeper, receding into pitch black that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. And from inside, that voice came again, this time higher, lighter, like a child. "Don't leave me." I froze. Mason, jaw tight, reached his arm inside again. "Come on, we'll get you out." The instant his fingers crossed the threshold, something grabbed him. His whole body jerked forward, and I lunged, grabbing his belt to keep him from being pulled in. Whatever had him was strong, unnaturally strong. I could feel Mason being tugged inch by inch toward the darkness. The crying hit a pitch that made my vision blur. I dug my heels in, and pulled with everything I had. With a final wrench, Mason tore free, stumbling back with deep scratches down his forearm. The house went silent again. We didn't speak. We didn't look back. Somehow, this time, the front door opened when we tried it, swinging wide to reveal the driveway and the thin glow of our ambulance lights. We stepped out into the cold night air, hearts hammering, every instinct screaming to keep moving. But just as we reached the rig, a faint sound drifted from the house, the crying, and layered beneath it, like a lullaby sung just for us, was that same man's voice whispering our names. It followed us all the way down the road. We were halfway through a quiet shift when dispatch crackled in with a priority call, possible cardiac arrest at a small farmhouse on the edge of town. The voice on the other end sounded tense, even for an emergency. Patient is conscious, but in distress, the dispatcher said. Caller reports, something strange with the heartbeat. Mason and I exchanged a glance. We'd both heard odd descriptions before, people panicking, confusing symptoms, but this sounded different. We hit the sirens and rolled out. The house was a weathered two-story, with its porch light flickering against the dark. A woman met us at the door, eyes wide, voice trembling. It's my husband. He's wrong. You have to hurry. We followed her inside, to a small, dimly lit bedroom. The man on the bed was pale and slick with sweat, his shirt clinging to his chest. He was breathing in shallow gasps, each one rattling. His eyes fluttered toward us, glassy with confusion. I went straight for vitals. Sir, can you tell me your name? He mumbled something I couldn't make out, his lips barely moving. I checked his carotid artery. Nothing. No radial pulse either. My frown deepened as I reached for my stethoscope. No pulse, I told Mason. Not a flicker. Then what the hell is this? Mason asked, leaning in. Through the stethoscope, I heard it immediately. Thump, thump, thump. Strong, steady, almost too loud. It didn't match what I was seeing. His skin was warm, his chest visibly rising and falling, but the monitors wouldn't have read a thing. I switched to the other side of his chest. The sound was the same, solid, forceful beats, like someone slamming a drum inside his ribcage. And I swear, even without the stethoscope, I could hear it faintly, like it was reverberating through the bed frame. The patient's eyes rolled toward me. His voice was hoarse, but the words were clear enough this time. It's not mine. It's not mine. What's not yours? I asked, but he just shuddered, squeezing his eyes shut. Mason brought over the portable monitor, attaching the leads quickly. The screen blinked to life. Flat line, no rhythm, no activity. That's impossible, Mason muttered. I can hear it beating. The man's wife hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands. It started this afternoon. He said he could feel it, but not like normal. He said it was too loud, like it was coming from somewhere else. Then he collapsed, and she stopped, her eyes darting to her husband's chest. The thumping seemed to grow louder for a moment, enough that Mason and I exchanged another uneasy glance. We need to move him, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ma'am, follow us in your car. We slid him onto the stretcher. As we lifted, I felt it through the metal rails, a deep, heavy vibration with each beat. It was steady and strong, but still, no pulse. The patient's breathing hitched as we wheeled him toward the ambulance. He muttered again, almost to himself, under the floor, "Keep it from me." I leaned down as we pushed him into the rig. What's under the floor? His eyes snapped open for just a second, locking onto mine with such intensity that I froze mid-step. "You'll hear it," he whispered, and then his head lolled back, the pounding in his chest somehow louder than our own footsteps. I didn't like what that implied. We slammed the ambulance doors shut, Mason climbing into the driver's seat, while I stayed with the patient in back. The engine rumbled to life, but it didn't drown out the thump-thump coming from the stretcher. Up close, it was even worse. I didn't need a stethoscope. Hell, I didn't even need to touch him to hear it. Each beat was solid, deep, almost mechanical. The sound didn't just fill the rig. It felt like it was pressing into my skin. I clipped the monitor leads back on him, hoping the movement had been why we got a flat line before. Nothing. The screen stayed stubbornly blank, no matter how loud that heartbeat got. The patient stirred, his eyelids fluttering. I leaned in. "You're in the ambulance. We're getting you to the hospital. Can you hear me?" His lips moved, dry and cracked. "It's louder now." I frowned. "What is?" He didn't answer. His gaze drifted past me, toward the rig's rear doors, as if something was back there. I glanced over my shoulder, just the reflective lettering of the doors, and the sway of the road lights flashing across them. The thump-thump quickened slightly, and that's when I realized it wasn't perfectly even anymore. There was a faint hitch between every third and fourth beat, like whatever was making the sound was adjusting itself. Mason's voice came through the intercom from the cab. "You hearing this back there? Feels like the whole floor's vibrating." I pressed my palm to the stretcher rail. He wasn't wrong. The metal had a hum to it now, a faint resonance with each beat. The patient's breathing turned shallow again, so I reached for the bag valve mask. But when I placed my hand on his sternum to position it, his chest pushed back, not like a reflex, like something inside had shoved against my palm from the inside out. I snatched my hand away. His eyes opened wide, glassy but alert, and he whispered, "Don't push it." A cold sweat prickled my neck. I decided to try an IV line, but when I went for his arm, I hesitated. His skin was warm, but there was no vascular response, no pulse to guide me. It was like trying to find life in a mannequin that somehow breathed. Then, without warning, the thump-thump surged, so loud it rattled the oxygen tanks against the wall. Mason cursed from up front, the rig swaying as he gripped the wheel. What the hell was that? I looked down at the patient. He was mouthing something rapidly, too quiet for me to catch over the pounding. I bent close. "Under the floor, under the floor." The words came out in perfect rhythm, with the heartbeats, like he was keeping time with them. I pulled back, unsettled. "Mason, how far are we?" "5 minutes," he said, voice tight. "And it's getting harder to keep this thing on the road. Feels like we're driving on a damn drum." The patient's chest rose sharply, like he was taking a huge breath, and then everything stopped. No sound, no movement, just silence so abrupt, it made my ears ring. The monitor still showed a flat line. I leaned over him, checking his airway, ready to start compressions, when a single thump exploded through the rig, loud enough to make the overhead lights flicker, and it was followed by another, then another. Only this time, it didn't sound like it was coming from him. It was coming from beneath us. The last 2 minutes of the drive felt like an eternity. Every beat seemed to shake the rig from the floor up, like we were rolling over hidden speed bumps that only we could feel. Mason kept his foot steady, but I could hear the strain in the engine, as if it was fighting the road itself. When we finally swung into the ambulance bay, the moment the rig stopped, the pounding stopped too. Silence. The ER doors slid open, nurses and orderlies rushing toward us. We wheeled the patient out fast. As soon as the stretcher hit the tile floor inside, the thump-thump started again, deep, resonant, bouncing off the walls. The nearest nurse froze mid-step. "What the hell is that?" "His heartbeat," Mason said, voice flat. "Except, there's no pulse." I expected skepticism, maybe even a laugh. Instead, the nurse leaned down, listened for herself, and her face went pale. "It's too loud." Within seconds, we had a small crowd around the stretcher. Everyone could hear it, without even trying, the sound somehow filling the entire trauma bay. Dr. Patel, one of the senior ER physicians, stepped in and grabbed a stethoscope. He listened for a few seconds before pulling it away like it burned him. No carotid pulse, no radial pulse, but there's a sound. He waved for the techs. "Get him on ultrasound now." We moved fast. The tech smeared gel across the patient's chest, slid the probe into place, and froze. Doc, you should see this." The monitor showed the patient's chest cavity clear as day, but where the heart should have been, there was nothing. Just an open space, framed by ribs, faint movement at the edges like muscle twitching. Could be an equipment failure, Patel said, but his voice lacked conviction. The tech swapped probes. The image sharpened. Still no heart, just a hollow void where one should be. Yet the sound of the beat was so loud, it was picked up on the machine's audio feed. What's moving in there? I asked. The tech hesitated. It's not moving in a normal pattern. It's more like something's pushing from the outside, into the chest cavity. The patient's eyes fluttered open. You see it, he rasped. You know it's not mine. Patel leaned in. What's not yours? The patient gave a slow, pained smile. The one under the floor. Before we could press him, the sound changed. It was no longer confined to his chest. It seemed to come from the walls, the floor beneath our feet, the ceiling tiles above. Every beat sent a faint vibration up through the soles of my shoes. One of the nurses backed away toward the door. It's in the room, she whispered. Patel's eyes darted toward me. And Mason, has this been happening since pickup? Since before, Mason said. It followed us here. The thump-thump grew erratic now, quickening, then slowing, like it was searching for something. A monitor in the corner began to flicker in time with the sound, static buzzing faintly on its speakers. Then came a sharp bang from the patient's ribcage, 3 distinct knocks, loud enough to make the tech drop the probe. The patient arched his back, gasping, his hands clutching the sides of the bed. It's trying to get out. The lights overhead dimmed. Somewhere in the building, an alarm began to beep, out of sync with the patient's so-called heartbeat. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent again. The silence after the pounding was worse than the noise itself. It pressed in on us, heavy and expectant, like the whole room was holding its breath. I glanced at Mason. He was standing rigid, eyes locked on the patient's chest. Dr. Patel started to speak, but the patient's hand shot out and clamped around my wrist with surprising strength. His grip was ice cold. It's looking for another one, he whispered. Another what? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His pupils were wide, swallowing almost all the color in his eyes. Another heart. Before I could respond, the floor under my boots gave a faint tremor. Not much, just enough to feel like someone had stomped down the hallway outside. Then it happened again, this time closer. The patient's grip tightened. The sound came back, not in his chest this time, but in the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Thump thump, steady, deliberate. The lights above us swayed slightly in their fixtures. A nurse muttered, "It's moving." Patel snapped his head toward her. What? She pointed toward the far end of the trauma bay. A rolling cart, empty except for a clipboard, was inching forward in tiny jerks, as if nudged by invisible hands. With each heartbeat sound, it shifted another inch. The patient's breathing quickened. "Don't let it find me." Patel gestured for security, but the 2 officers at the door weren't eager to come closer. One of them reached for his radio, then froze when the radio's speaker crackled in time with the thump-thump. I felt the vibration through the gurney rails again, stronger now. The metal frame shivered under my fingers. "Mason," I said quietly, "tell me you're feeling this too." "Every damn beat," he replied. The sound quickened, almost like a gallop, echoing from multiple directions at once. It was no longer just a noise. It was a presence, something moving unseen through the room. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp bangs from inside the patient's ribcage, like fists pounding against wood. The patient cried out, arching his back. "It's here." The floor tremor spiked. Equipment rattled. AV poles clanged against the wall, and a stack of metal trays toppled with a crash. The heartbeat sound swelled until it drowned out everything else, shaking the glass in the observation window. Patel shouted, "Get into radiology, now." But before we could move him, the sound split, one rhythm from his chest, another from the far corner of the room, both in perfect sync at first. Then the second rhythm broke away, slower, heavier, more deliberate. Everyone turned toward the corner. There was nothing there, just an empty space beside a cabinet. But the cabinet's door hinges groaned, and it swung open on its own. The dark inside seemed deeper than it should have been, like the light couldn't reach the back. The patient's head jerked toward it, his mouth opening in silent terror. "It's mine now," he whispered. The second heartbeat grew louder, filling the room, until the first one in his chest was drowned out completely. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it cut off. Total silence. No one moved. The patient lay still, eyes wide, chest rising and falling fast. Then he looked straight at me and said almost calmly, "You've heard it now. You can't unhear it." Somewhere down the hall, far from the trauma bay, the thump-thump started again. We all stood frozen, ears straining toward the hallway. The thump-thump was faint but growing louder, like something was making its way toward us, one slow, steady step at a time. Patel broke the silence. "Move him now. We're transferring to isolation." We unhooked the monitors and began rolling the stretcher. The wheels squeaked against the tile, and with every foot we moved, the pounding outside seemed to shift, keeping pace, matching our speed. Mason muttered under his breath, "It's following us." I didn't argue. As we turned down a side corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered. The sound grew deeper, resonating in my chest like bass from a massive speaker. The patient was breathing faster now, his gaze darting between us and the ceiling. "Don't go that way," he whispered. "It's waiting ahead." Patel ignored him, focusing on getting us to the secure wing. But as we rounded the next corner, the sound stopped again. We all froze. Then from directly behind us, a single deafening thump, the gurney jolted, hard enough to knock one of the IV bags off its hook. I spun around. Nothing was there, just an empty stretch of hallway, leading back to the trauma bay. But the floor tiles had a faint tremor to them, like something had just slammed into the ground. "Keep moving," Patel barked. We burst through the isolation room doors, and the moment the gurney's wheels crossed the threshold, the heartbeat faded to almost nothing. The patient slumped back, eyes closing, his lips moved without sound. I leaned in. "What is it?" "Not done," he breathed. "Never done." We transferred him to the isolation bed. The room felt still, almost normal, except for a faint echo that seemed to linger in the air, like the sound was just beyond the walls listening. Patel ordered a full-body scan, but the imaging tech wouldn't enter without extra staff present. Even with the patient sedated, the heartbeat started again, the moment the machine powered on. This time though, it wasn't just sound, it was visible. On the monitor, faint ripples pulsed outward from an empty space in his chest cavity, like a sonar ping. The ripples didn't stop at his body, they continued beyond the edge of the scan, as if reaching for something outside. The tech muttered, "That's not supposed to be possible." The patient stirred mid-scan, mumbling, "Under the floor, it's closer." We finished quickly, but before we could wheel him back, the thump-thump outside the room exploded in volume. The walls shuddered, ceiling dust rained down. One of the nurses screamed. The sound wasn't just behind the walls anymore, it was inside the floor, directly beneath our feet, moving in circles like a predator pacing its cage. The patient sat up abruptly, eyes wide and unblinking. His voice came out in a rasp that carried over the pounding. "It's here for you now." Then just like before, everything went still. We stood in that silence for what felt like minutes, waiting for the next sound. When none came, Patel told us to secure the room and leave a guard posted. But as Mason and I walked back toward the ambulance bay, we both heard it, faint but distinct, a slow thump-thump, coming from somewhere under the floor, following us step for step. And I knew then, as sure as I've ever known anything, that it wasn't going to stop.